have a lot of slides, and I may just skip through some of them because I really want to have the conversation with you about where to go next. But to tell you a little bit about the organization I'm working with now, that's California Council on Science and Technology. I started to, so I laid there last night thinking about what I was going to tell you. I realized how many initiatives I put on the slide, and there are more that wouldn't fit on the slide, and I got to it. And then I'll tell you more detail about what I worked on, the MBEST Center, Monterey Bay Education, Science, and Technology Center at Fort Ord, and something called MB Cork, Monterey Bay Crescent Ocean Research Consortium. And I just stepped down as the chair of that, and that's the regional marine institutions around the bay. Then I'll finish up with challenges, opportunities, and some closing thoughts. Quickly, the CCST is something that turned out Sam Farr had started 20 years ago when he was in the State Assembly, so I guess I'm just following his career, trying to implement ideas that he had a long time ago. It's an organization that brings together the higher ed institutions in the state, public and private, on a council, and we bring in scientists and engineers from all over the state to advise the legislature and the executive branch of the state government on S&T, science and technology issues. The work has been there, it's been there for 20 years. It has a council of 30 members, and senior fellows of about 120. The University of California, CSU, the community colleges, Stanford, Caltech, USC, and our affiliates with the national labs across the state. And our core funding comes from those institutions. We then go on to work on particular projects, and we raise funding for those projects. Some of the things we've done before I joined them, and we're currently doing things like developing the IP policy for the new stem cell center. And when I say we do it, what we do is we go out and we find the talent in the state and bring them together around a project or funding or testimony in Sacramento. Looking at the ones we're doing now, actually, I'll tell you, we're launching a scientific and engineer fellowship program in the state legislature. We have about almost $7 million of funding from the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation and several other foundations to bring scientists and engineers to be one-year fellows in the state legislature. And I was in Sacramento yesterday, and our bill was passed out in the Higher Education Committee. There's a bill to enable this program, and we're moving forward on that one rapidly to be placing fellows in the fall. The idea there is to try to bring science closer to the policy discussion, and that's relevant to our regional discussion because this region is about science in many, many ways, and it's one of those opportunities we have. We're also working on the energy futures of the state of California, looking at a 50-year time frame, what options the state has, and parallel with the National Academies of Science study that's being done now for the America's future. In fact, we've been called the National Academy or the National Research Council for California. Some of you remember Carl Piester. Carl's the chair of the board of CCST, who was also my chancellor when we were working on Fort Ord, so it just sort of moves along. So here are some of the regional initiatives that came before Imagination Coast, and these are the only ones I know about. I'm sure, Neil, you probably can tell us others that have happened over the years. The Fort Ord reuse in '91 was a huge regional effort. It brought together, was it 7 cities in the county in a very, brought them together in a very difficult way. Legislation was essentially brought to force the union of those communities. And if you've ever sat or read about Fort Ord, it was a fascinating process to see how disparate types of communities, some had a lot of money like Carmel and Monterey, some had no money like Seaside and Marina, and we learned a lot in the process about how some people can wait a long time to develop what they want, and some people in those communities have to develop quickly so they can make some revenue. And so that was a fascinating effort. The MBEST Center was considered one of the anchors of that reuse along with CSU Monterey Bay. In fact, the idea at the time was that it would be the first place and the only place in the state of California where you have CSU and UC co-located. And we had at the time great hope that that would sort of cross that barrier that we still see in the higher ed system in the state, where we would work together and be a sort of spectrum of activity, that would, full spectrum of activity. Clearly you know about AMBAG, and I think it's a wonderful idea. It has Tri-County Economic Forum, which is something I've been part of for years and years, and I think it's one of the places that it really tries to create regional dialogue. It has, though, the self-interest of all the parties at the table at the AMBAG, and that's one of the challenges of the region, I think, is that we still think about our turf lines, our boundary lines, and I'm hoping that this time around in Imagination Coast it will go beyond that. Monterey Bay Futures Network came at the time Fort Ord was closing, PG&E had, at that time, I don't know if they're still doing it, but would invest a lot of money in economic development. It was good for the community, but it was also good for PG&E. And they came in and brought some big studies, and they did a lot of work with groups of us and looked at clusters and all those kinds of things. And we came out with a nonprofit called the Monterey Bay Futures Network. And it would get us together around the Bay, a little bit like this, around ideas and initiatives. And one initiative was something called I3LA. It was about infrastructure, high-speed infrastructure in the region. And it brought together nonprofits and businesses and the government in a variety of ways. It was great, and some of the people I worked with in that network are still very close colleagues and friends, and it really did build some bond across the Bay. However, I was one of the co-presidents when we had to disband it, because what happened after a while, it was only the government people who were coming to the meetings, because we were being paid to build relationship, and people who ran businesses weren't getting paid to do that. They needed to go run their businesses. And we kept trying to do a public-private thing, and we could never find a way to keep the business at the table. But they weren't interested in our conversations and processes were too slow for them. Or we weren't addressing the kinds of things they needed addressed. So that disappeared. We also had all this work. We have an education consortium. I think it still exists, the Monterey Bay Education Consortium, the educational institutions around the Bay. On the Monterey side, I think they even got stronger, and they would bring, I think they call it the Big Five, and they'd bring the leaders of the institutions down there together. And they regularly have meetings trying to look for ways that they could share curriculum, they could sort of do things together and make a bigger whole. MD Cork was formed in 1998, and I'll tell you a few minutes about some of the efforts we did to bring other regional research institutions to Monterey. But this was the idea to create a consortium of all the higher ed and research institutions, the Aquarium, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, MBARI, UC, CSU. And it still exists, and I've got some brochures here that I'll pass out. Something that we put together. And what we found when we did this is by stepping up and actually giving it a name and putting things on paper, it started to get a little bit of life. So one of my words of advice is the sooner we do that for Imagination Post, the sooner it will get some traction in that visibility. But the MD Cork, through MD Cork, we did a lot of things of creating large-scale research initiatives between the institutions around the Bay. We helped promote the region. It was helpful in Washington, D.C. on different initiatives to be able to talk about this region. And it helped support the idea of bringing the marine fisheries to Santa Cruz, bringing USGS to Santa Cruz. Those were some of the things that we were doing. USGS was a 12-year effort, and the Marine Fisheries Lab at Long Marine Lab was a 6-year effort. And, but we formed the MD Cork in 1998 when that was the Year of the Ocean. There was a big conference down in Monterey, and President Clinton and all the deans came for that. And we decided that, boy, we had a deadline of 45 days. What could we do in those 45 days? We created a MOU, we created a consortium, we drew a picture of the Bay, and we got some really nice press. And some of the press in the Mercury basically said that this region, I still believe it, this region has it competes with Woods Hole and Scripps, and the number of scientists and the depth of science being done in the environment, deep ocean to deep space. So we go all the UCO LIT observatories being run out of Santa Cruz, and the NASA relationships here down to MBARI's work. This is one of the places in the world where we have a concentration of scientists working across that spectrum, particularly as we go into climate change issues. It can be very powerful if we could organize it. A couple other things quickly. The business councils, Monterey and Monterey, it shouldn't have a B, and Santa Cruz counties. I forget the guy's name who started them, but he came to the region. We asked him to do one council. He said, no, we need 2. He got paid by each council. That was his fee. But what we were trying to do throughout this period of time was to create the sense of region. That it didn't stop at the river. It wasn't Santa Cruz County versus Monterey County. It was all of us were in this game together. Business councils, I think, still exist. Lighthouse Venture Forum, did any of you ever go to the Lighthouse Venture Forum? That was a great organization, and it was led essentially by a business here in Santa Cruz. And it would hold things like this with speakers, and it was well attended, would pack the room. Where did we hold them? I forget where that was, but they were packed. And it was just wonderful, but with the downturn, the business wouldn't spend that kind of time, and it sort of just disappeared.